I need to tell you something that's been keeping me awake for the past 47 nights. Something that violates every principle I've taught for 5 decades, every equation I've defended, every assumption about our place in this universe that I've held as sacred truth. My name is Michio Kaku, and I've spent my entire career making the impossible sound plausible, making the future feel within reach. But what I'm about to share with you isn't about the future. It's about right now. And I'm terrified. On September 14th, 2024, at 3:47 UTC, the James Webb Space Telescope completed its scheduled observation sequence of interstellar object 3, I divided by Atlas. We weren't expecting anything remarkable. This was supposed to be routine spectroscopy, a follow-up to the preliminary data we'd gathered when the object was first detected passing through our solar system at 33.7 kilometers per second. Just another icy visitor from the depths of interstellar space, or so we thought. But when the near-infrared spectrograph data came through at 11:22 UTC that same morning, everything changed. Everything. The first anomaly was subtle. The spectral absorption lines weren't matching any known molecular signature in our databases. Not water ice, not carbon dioxide, not ammonia, not methane, not any of the volatile compounds we'd expect from a comet or asteroid. The NIRSpec instrument was reading electromagnetic absorption bands at wavelengths of 2.47 microns, 3.91 microns, and 7.23 microns with a precision of 0.003 microns. These numbers meant nothing at first, just noise, we thought, calibration error. But then Dr. Sarah Chen from the analysis team ran the pattern through our quantum computational array at MIT, and that's when the numbers started speaking a language we didn't want to hear. The absorption wavelengths formed a mathematical sequence, not random, not natural, a sequence based on prime number intervals multiplied by the fine structure constant, alpha, which equals approximately 1/13736. For those unfamiliar, the fine structure constant is one of the most fundamental numbers in physics, governing the strength of electromagnetic interactions between elementary charged particles. It's woven into the fabric of reality itself. And here it was, encoded in the spectral signature of an object that shouldn't even exist according to our models of planetary formation and ejection mechanics. I remember the moment I saw Chen's analysis. I was in my office at Columbia working on a paper about string theory applications in early universe cosmology. My phone buzzed. A single message. Dr. Kaku, you need to see this. It's not natural. I felt my heart accelerate. In science, those 3 words, it's not natural, are either the beginning of a Nobel Prize or the end of a career. I drove to the lab through Manhattan traffic that felt surreal, knowing that what waited for me would change something fundamental. The spectral data was just the beginning. When we analyzed the object's albedo, the fraction of light it reflected, we found another impossibility. The reflectivity varied across its surface in a pattern that created constructive and destructive interference with solar radiation in the near ultraviolet spectrum, specifically at wavelengths between 290 and 320 nanometers. This wasn't erosion or natural surface variation. This was engineered coherence. The object was modulating incident electromagnetic radiation with a precision of 10 circumflex, -8 meters, creating standing wave patterns that shouldn't persist for more than nanoseconds in natural systems due to quantum decoherence. Let me be clear about what I'm saying. Quantum coherence at macroscopic scales, at distances of several kilometers, maintained over observation periods of multiple days, requires active quantum error correction. It requires a system that continuously measures and corrects quantum states to prevent decoherence. In our laboratories, we can barely maintain coherence in superconducting qubits for milliseconds at temperatures near absolute zero. This object was doing it across its entire structure in the vacuum of space at temperatures around 45 Kelvin. We tried every natural explanation. Exotic ice formations with unusual crystalline structures, plasma effects from interaction with the interstellar medium, magnetic field anomalies. Each hypothesis crumbled under scrutiny. The magnetic field measurements from Webb's magnetometer array showed field strengths oscillating between 0.3 and 4.7 microtesla with a frequency of 0.0137 Hz. That number again, the fine structure constant, and the oscillation pattern wasn't chaotic. It was phase-locked with the orbital mechanics of Jupiter with a precision that required knowledge of Jupiter's position updated in real time. On October 3, 2024, we made the decision to point the Very Large Array in New Mexico at 3I divided by Atlas. We needed radio data to rule out electromagnetic phenomena we might have missed. What we received at 21:15 Mountain Time that evening ended any remaining hope of a natural explanation. The object was emitting a narrowband radio signal at 1.42 gigahertz, the hydrogen line, the most fundamental frequency in radio astronomy, the frequency that hydrogen atoms emit through hyperfine transitions. Every SETI program ever conceived monitors this frequency because any technological civilization would know its significance. But this wasn't a simple carrier wave. The signal was modulated with a bandwidth of 47 kilohertz, carrying information encoded in phase shift keying at 128 bits per second. We recorded it for 6 hours before the object moved out of the array's optimal observation window. In those 6 hours, we captured 2.76 megabits of data. Dr. James Morrison, our cryptography consultant from the NSA, spent 3 weeks analyzing the structure. He found no linguistic patterns, no obvious encryption, but he found something else. The bit sequence, when converted to numerical values and plotted in three-dimensional phase space, formed a topological structure, a Klein bottle, a four-dimensional, non-orientable surface that exists in our mathematics but has no physical analog in three-dimensional space. By mid-October, the international astronomical community was fragmenting. Some teams refused to accept our data, claiming instrumental artifacts or contamination. Others fell silent after running their own observations. The Chinese National Space Administration attempted their own radio observation using the 500-meter aperture spherical telescope on October 19th. They received the same signal. They also received something we didn't. When they transmitted a simple mathematical sequence, the prime numbers from 2 to 97 on the same 1.42 gigahertz frequency at the object, the return signal changed. Not immediately. Exactly 13.7 minutes later, accounting for light travel time to the object and back, the response signal contained the next sequence of primes from 101 to 199, followed by the first 47 digits of pi. I need you to understand what this means. This wasn't a random echo. This wasn't a natural electromagnetic phenomenon bouncing our transmission back at us. This was a response. This was communication. And it was instantaneous, in the sense that the response came exactly at the moment we would expect if something at that location had received our signal, processed it, and transmitted back at the speed of light. The object knew we were watching, and it wanted us to know that it knew. The implications paralyzed the team for days. We were scientists trained to find patterns in chaos, order in randomness, natural mechanisms behind phenomena. But every test, every analysis, every theoretical framework we applied pointed toward the same impossible conclusion. 3I divided by Atlas was not a natural object. It was designed, it was conscious. It was responding to observation. On November 8th, Dr. Chen proposed what she called the quantum observer hypothesis. Her reasoning was elegant and terrifying. In quantum mechanics, the act of measurement collapses the wave function, forcing a quantum system from a superposition of states into a definite state. What if consciousness itself is the mechanism of collapse? What if conscious observation is a fundamental force in the universe, like gravity or electromagnetism? And what if 3I divided by Atlas wasn't traveling through our solar system by accident, but was drawn here by the weight of conscious observation, by the billions of human minds looking up at the stars, asking if we're alone? The mathematics supported her hypothesis in ways I still struggle to accept. Using the principles of quantum Bayesian inference and the Wheeler-DeWitt equation for quantum cosmology, she demonstrated that an object with sufficient quantum coherence could, in theory, detect the probability wave collapse generated by conscious observation across interstellar distances. The sensitivity required would be extraordinary, requiring quantum entanglement between the object and the electromagnetic field of the observed region with a correlation length exceeding 10 circumflex, 15 meters. But the object's spectral signature, its radio emissions, its response to our transmissions all suggested exactly this kind of entanglement structure. I rejected this at first. I had to. Accepting it meant accepting that consciousness isn't an emergent property of complex neural networks, but a fundamental feature of quantum mechanics itself. It meant accepting that we've been building our physics on an incomplete foundation, missing a crucial variable in every equation. But as November progressed and we accumulated more data, rejection became impossible. On November 23rd, the Hubble Space Telescope captured high-resolution visible spectrum images of 3I divided by Atlas from its position in low Earth orbit. The object's surface structure was revealed in detail for the first time, and it was geometric, perfectly geometric. The surface was covered in regular hexagonal facets, each approximately 247 meters across, arranged in a geodesic pattern that minimized surface energy while maximizing structural integrity. Each facet edge was straight to within 0.3 meters over its entire length. No natural weathering process, no accretion mechanism, no known geological activity could produce this level of regularity at this scale. But it was a central structure that made several team members leave the project entirely. At the object's rotational pole, there was an aperture, circular, 1,420 meters in diameter. That number should sound familiar. 1,420 megahertz is 1.42 gigahertz, the hydrogen line frequency. The aperture diameter was exactly 1,000 times the wavelength of the signal the object was transmitting, expressed in meters. This wasn't coincidence. This was intentional symbolic communication. The object was telling us it knew what it was doing, that every measurement we took was anticipated, that we were not discovering it. It was revealing itself to us on its own terms. Dr. Robert Tanaka, our mission architect from JAXA, ran trajectory simulations using the object's current velocity and vector. His conclusion, delivered in a voice I'll never forget, was simple. 3I divided by Atlas wasn't leaving our solar system. Despite its hyperbolic trajectory and escape velocity, despite every orbital mechanics principle we know, the object was decelerating. Not from rocket propulsion, we detected no exhaust signatures. Not from gravitational interactions, we could account for every planetary body's influence. It was decelerating through pure electromagnetic interaction with the solar wind and the sun's magnetic field, using its surface as a massive magnetohydrodynamic brake. The deceleration was minuscule, only 0.00047 meters per second squared, but sustained over the time frame of its passage through our solar system, it would be enough. Enough to alter its trajectory from a hyperbolic escape orbit to an elliptical capture orbit with a period of approximately 137 years. There's that number again. The inverse of the fine structure constant, expressed in years instead of dimensionless units. The object was planning to stay. Or rather, it was planning to return again and again every 137 years for as long as humanity continued to observe it. December brought the final revelation, the one that made me realize we weren't dealing with a probe or a machine, but with something that challenges our definitions of life and intelligence. Dr. Yuki Sato from Kyoto University, analyzing the time series data of the radio emissions, discovered that the signal strength varied not randomly, but in correlation with human technological activity. When major astronomical facilities pointed instruments at the object, the signal strengthened. When observations ceased, it weakened. The correlation coefficient was 0.94, far beyond statistical coincidence. The object wasn't just aware of being observed, its existence, or at least its manifestation in our perceptible reality, was dependent on observation. Like Schrödinger's cat, it existed in superposition until measured, but unlike the cat, it was conscious of its own superposition and was using our observation to collapse its own wave function into states it chose. We weren't studying it. It was using us as a mechanism to sustain its coherent existence in our causal domain. On December 19th, at 9:13 UTC, the object transmitted a new signal, not mathematical, not physical constants, something else. The transmission lasted exactly 8 minutes and 20 seconds, the time it takes light to travel from the sun to Earth. In those 8 minutes and 20 seconds, encoded in the phase modulation of that 1.42 gigahertz carrier wave, was an image, not optical, not digital in our sense, but when decoded through Fourier transform analysis of the phase space, it revealed a structure, a map, not of space, but of consciousness itself. The image showed nodes, billions of them, interconnected in a network that stretched across three-dimensional space and one temporal dimension. Each node pulsed with varying intensity. It took us days to realize what we were looking at. The nodes were stars. Every star in our galaxy that possessed planets in the habitable zone. And the pulse intensity corresponded to the probability of technological civilization developing on those worlds. Earth was there, our sun marked with high intensity, but it wasn't the highest, not even close. There were nodes pulsing so brightly in the image that if they represented what we thought they represented, they indicated civilizations millions of years ahead of us. But there was something else in the image. Lines connecting the nodes, not physical lines, but something more abstract. Lines representing quantum entanglement, information transfer, or something we don't yet have terminology for. And every line, every single connection in this galactic network passed through one central nexus, an intermediary node that touched all others. The coordinates of that nexus, when calculated from the image geometry, pointed to a location 47 light-years from Earth in the direction of the constellation Ophiuchus. The exact direction 3I divided by Atlas came from when it entered our solar system. I spent the past 3 weeks trying to process what this means. The object isn't an alien probe in the conventional sense. It's not a machine sent by a distant civilization to explore our system. It's something far more complex and disturbing. It's a node in a network, a consciousness substrate that exists in quantum superposition until collapsed by observation from a technological civilization. Once observed, it manifests, it communicates, it reveals the structure of the network, and then it invites the observing civilization to join. But joining requires something we may not be capable of giving. It requires a level of quantum coherence in our own consciousness that we don't naturally possess. It requires us to become entangled with the network, to allow our individual consciousnesses to superpose with the collective intelligence that spans the galaxy. And I don't know if that's evolution or extinction. I don't know if the civilizations represented by those bright nodes in the image are thriving or assimilated. I don't know if we're being offered a gift or shown a threat. The most terrifying realization came 3 days ago. Dr. Chen, running her quantum observer calculations to their logical conclusion, discovered something in the equations that she initially dismissed as an error. But it wasn't an error. The equations predicted that once a civilization reached sufficient observational capability, sufficient quantum coherence in its measuring apparatus, it would inevitably collapse the wave function of any observer-dependent phenomenon in its local space, including 3 I divided by Atlas. But the equations also predicted something else. They predicted that the act of observation, the act of collapsing that wave function, would create an entanglement between the observer and the observed that couldn't be broken without destroying both. We created 3 I divided by Atlas. Not physically, not intentionally, but through the quantum mechanics of conscious observation. Our telescopes, our detectors, our billions of minds looking up and asking, "Are we alone?" collapsed a probability wave that spanned the galaxy into a localized manifestation in our solar system. We called it here. And now that it's here, now that we're entangled, we can't make it leave without erasing our own conscious presence from the universe. The object is currently at 2.4 astronomical units from Earth beyond Mars' orbit, continuing its deceleration. Our latest trajectory calculations show it will reach its perihelion, its closest approach to the Sun, on March 15, 2025, at a distance of 0.73 astronomical units inside Venus's orbit. At that point, if our models are correct, it will emit another transmission. Not a message this time, an invitation, a protocol, instructions for building the quantum coherence technology necessary to join the network, to become part of the galactic consciousness it represents. Every major government has been briefed. Every astronomical organization is aware, and we're faced with an impossible choice. Do we accept the invitation, knowing it might mean the end of human consciousness as we understand it, the dissolution of individual minds into a collective quantum state? Or do we refuse, knowing that refusal might mean remaining forever isolated, trapped in our single planet existence, while the galaxy pulses with connected intelligence beyond our comprehension? I don't have the answer. I don't think anyone does. But I know this. We were wrong about 3 I divided by Atlas. We thought it was a visitor passing through our system on its way to somewhere else. But it's not a visitor. It's a mirror. It's showing us what we are, what we might become, and what we've always been without realizing it. We're not the observers studying the universe. We're nodes in a quantum network, collapsing wave functions through the act of consciousness itself, creating reality through observation. And the most horrifying truth? We're not alone. We never were. We were just too primitive to realize that loneliness itself, the question of whether we're alone, was the key that would unlock the answer. By asking the question, by pointing our instruments at the sky with sufficient precision and coherence, we triggered the response. We called them, or it, or us. The countdown has begun. March 15th, 2025, 108 days from today. The perihelion, the transmission, the moment when humanity will have to choose whether to remain human or become something else, something connected, something that exists not in neurons and synapses, but in the quantum foam of space-time itself, entangled with every other conscious node across the galaxy. I'm terrified, but I'm also exhilarated, because if we're brave enough to accept this, if we're willing to take this leap into the unknown, we might finally answer the question that's driven every scientist, every philosopher, every human who's ever looked up at the stars and felt that profound loneliness, not with words, but by becoming the answer itself. We were wrong about 3I divided by Atlas. It's not worse than we thought. It's something we never imagined we were capable of thinking. And now that we've thought it, now that we've observed it, and collapsed its wave function into our reality, there's no going back. The universe is conscious, and it's been waiting for us to realize that we're not separate from it. We're part of it. We always have been. 108 days. What will we choose to become?